The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.
Tonight, former Friendly Fire hosts Irshad Manji and Michael reunite to discuss how they've gone from frenemies to friends. Up first, Premier Doug Ford wants our judges to be elected and to keep their noses out of his business. John Michael McGrath and yours truly dive in on a brand new episode of the On Poly podcast. That's ahead on the agenda. JMM, good to see you again, pal.
Hello,
Little
sir.
sugar to start with, as always. I love your May the 4th
Yes.
T-shirt.
Yes, it's once a year. I like to break it out.
Yeah.
More than once a year, but particularly now.
A couple of days early, but
Yes.
it's a Star Wars thing, right? May the 4th be with you.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
I think, was it 2 elections ago, the writs were issued on May the 4th for a June election, and so I got that felt particularly timely.
Now, because we're so close to May the 4th, I also thought about an anniversary that happens on May the 4th,
Yes.
which relates to Premier Leslie Frost, who was actually sworn in as Premier for the first time on May 4th, 1949, and died on May the 4th, 1973. But as you can see, I am not going with Leslie Frost today because we have a better anniversary to talk about today. If you want to, who's back there on camera 3? Dave, is that you? Okay, if you want to come in and zoom in on Mr. Frank Miller here, there we go. I'll lean over there so you can see the whole thing. That's Frank Miller's portrait. He is the 19th Premier of the province of Ontario, and it was 40 years ago today, May 2nd, 1985, that we had one of the most consequential elections in Ontario history. Frank Miller won that election, and what made the election so interesting was he won it, but then he lost power.
Yes.
So that was a weird election. The Frank Miller Conservatives got 52 seats. The Ontario Liberals under David Peterson got 48 seats. The New Democrats under Bob Rae got 25 seats, so a hung parliament, and Bob Rae became the kingmaker. And he decided, along with David Peterson, to defeat Frank Miller, and there was no election after the government was defeated. Frank Miller went to the lieutenant governor and simply said, I cannot command the confidence of the House anymore. These two folks over here think they can, Peterson and Rae. They wrote out an accord of items that they agreed on, and I'll pull my Peterson shirt out of the closet later in June when the first Liberal government in 42 years was sworn in, and so came to an end a 42-year-long Tory dynasty from 1943 to 1985, and Frank Miller was the last premier of that Tory dynasty.
You know, there's a bunch of different ways we could go with this story. I mean, the first thing that always comes to mind is I think a lot of Canadian political observers are like still 40 years later, like chasing the dragon of that that election because it was such a momentous one, as you say. The other thing I want to mention, because you know it is on brand for us to be procedurally nerdy as well, is that the way that the Miller government was defeated was by a motion in response to the throne speech, right? The government had presented its throne speech. Miller had presented a throne speech to the House. The legislature gets to debate a motion in response to the throne speech, and the substance of the motion was amended by the Liberals and the NDP, saying like, functionally, I think the amendment was, notwithstanding everything that was in the throne speech, we have no confidence in this government.
These guys got to go. Yeah.
And that's an amendment that the government or that the legislature voted on. The Tories rather lost the vote, and Mr. Miller appropriately went to the lieutenant governor and said, I can't keep going. So
I got to say, I knew Frank Miller reasonably well. He was actually a great guy, but he was older than Bill Davis, whom he succeeded, and David Peterson was a kind of a young, fresher face at that time. And Frank Miller just, you know, unfortunately for him and the Conservatives, was the wrong guy for the wrong time, and there you go.
yeah, that happens.
That's the way the cookie crumbles. Yeah. We do want to say one more thing before we go to issue 1, and that is some of you may have heard that Andrea Horwath, of course, the former leader of the Ontario New Democrats, now the mayor of Hamilton, had a very bad fall at City Hall and ended up having to go to the hospital. You got some beats on that, eh?
Yeah, it's reported that she fell on the stairs outside of Hamilton City Hall during the very windy conditions that we had here in the GTA on Tuesday, and I believe broke her wrist. So, obviously that can be a pretty serious injury.
Yeah, no fun at all. So Best wishes to Andrea Horvath, and we hope you'll get well soon.
Yeah, now you have a Hamilton reference and a Bill Davis reference, and we haven't even gone to issue one.
We're like 3 minutes in, and I've already checked 2 boxes. There we go.
I do have one other thing, just a quick update on a court case we have discussed previously on the podcast. This is the case of Mathur v. Ontario, where young Ontarians are suing the government over the decision by the Ford government early in its tenure to weaken provincial climate pollution targets. The trial court agreed that the change in policy would harm young people, but did not believe that this was a charter right issue. The Court of Appeal heard that case last year and disagreed with the decision of the trial judge, saying that the case had to be reheard with a different sort of charter analysis. On Thursday, the Supreme Court of Canada declined to hear the government's appeal of this case. So the decision of the Court of Appeal, Ontario's highest court, stands. The case will now be reheard by a trial court, again with a different analysis imposed. So this story is not over yet. We will be keeping an eye on it as it develops. I guess it has to go through the courts one more time and potentially could be heard by the Supreme Court at some point in the future.
While we're on the issue of courts and judges, oh my goodness, do we have a great story to tell, and we'll do it right now. Off to issue 1. On Wednesday of this week, Doug Ford was at a press conference with Attorney General Doug Downey to introduce some legislation around bail reform. But boy, did it go off the rails when reporters asked the Premier about the province's plans for judicial appointments. Let's have a look.
You know, one of these judges that are bleeding hearts, I can't wait till they retire. Matter of fact, I'll pay him to retire earlier. I'll pay you out for 2, 3, 4 years. Just get out of the system. Do you think these judges just come out of the blue? Do you think the appointments from the federal government? Do you think that the Liberal government for the last 10 years is going to appoint a tough on crime, conservative-minded judge? Not a chance. Not a chance. We're going to hire tough on crime judges and JPs, and they need to do their job. Simple as that. But every judge in this country has been politically appointed since before Moses. Maybe Moses was even politically appointed. I don't know. But I'll guarantee you one thing, we're going to be tough on crime. Simple as that.
Now, that's only a minute of the screed that the Premier went off on judges. There was lots before that. There was lots more after that. We may play another clip later about
also questionable theology there about Moses
I don't
being politically appointed.
I don't think Moses was a politically appointed judge, now that I think of it. That's a good point. Anyway, what's this hubbub all about?
So the government is rolling out a major piece of, let's call it crime and public safety legislation, and the Premier's remarks were specifically discussing legislation around bail. The conditions in which people can be released on bail is a federal issue that the province has had numerous complaints about. But the Premier is angry about judges releasing accused people on bail. And there have been some high-profile examples of people accused of crimes out on bail who then go on to be accused of further crimes.
Right.
Whenever we discuss bail, I feel like it is important to point out that, people are innocent until they are proven guilty, and the reason people are out on bail is because the state has not yet convicted them of a crime. Obviously, people can have different views about how well the process is working right now, but I think it is important to say that. Ford continued. He spoke about, he had many opinions about judges this week. He spoke about the injunction that was placed on the government. We talked about this last week about removing bike lanes in Toronto. Ford argued that we should start electing judges, something we do not generally do in Canada. Here is a clip of that.
And we ran on a mandate. We got elected democratically. Last time I checked, there hasn't been any judges elected. Maybe that's the problem. We should do what the U.S. does. Let's start electing our judges, holding them accountable. And that's my rant for the day, because I've just had it. We get elected to move forward, and some judge, because of the ideology, decides, well, let's put an injunction on bike lanes. You got to be kidding me. It's the system is broken. Over to you, Attorney General. Sorry, it made me feel better. I've been meaning to get this off my shoulders for 7 years.
You should see what he says in private.
Good line, Doug Downey. I'm not sure this is the best time to be saying that we ought to do anything like what the Americans do, Premier, with all due respect, but he came pretty close to calling out a particular judge by name there, did the Premier. And what is the conventional wisdom around doing that?
I mean, let me back up 1 second. It is a point of great frustration among journalists that when the government does not want to talk about something before the courts, they will just say, oh, well, we don't discuss a matter before the courts. We don't discuss it. They zip their lips and, you know, they decline to talk publicly about matters of public importance, and they wildly over-apply that rule. There is a genuine rule that in some cases elected officials should not talk about matters before the courts. Elected officials in Canada way overuse that rule, and journalists get very frustrated about it. So it's very funny to me that the Premier is now going off on a specific judge where a specific decision is still waiting to be issued. He's clearly quite upset about this injunction.
This is on the bike lanes.
Yes, the government had brought forward its law to remove certain bike lanes in Toronto. The judge heard the case, is in the midst of making the decision about whether the way that these bike lanes were removed or the way this law was passed, whether that violates a charter right. And it comes dangerously close to undermining people's confidence in the judicial system when you start accusing people of ideological accusation or ideological decisions at only minutes after demanding, in fact, a tough on crime ideological determination by other judges.
Well, obviously the Premier can say whatever he wants. He's the Premier of Ontario, but it has been a long-standing tradition that politicians, particularly as you say, with the decision not yet even having been released, politicians publicly putting pressure on judges to decide a case that the province has an interest in a particular way. We don't usually do that. That's all I'll say.
Yeah, and I will say, like, I'm not unsympathetic to certain arguments by I will say, broadly speaking, right of center legal observers who, in fact, think that, courts are over-applying certain sections of the Charter in ways that are thwarting the ability of elected governments to make policy. That's a much larger decision, and sometimes I think there's substance to it, and sometimes I think people protest too much. But this, when the Premier himself calls it a rant, I think we're allowed to fairly call it a rant. I don't think this rant was helpful.
Yeah. Let's, just for argument's sake here, go down this path and talk about electing judges. Obviously, they do elect some judges in the United States. They have to run for office on platforms. They raise money. They put ads on TV, et cetera, et cetera. We don't do that here.
No.
What's the advisability of doing it?
I mean, the idea of elected judges kind of fills me with horror, because when you can see how it in practice it actually works in the U.S., where, like, for example, there was a state Supreme Court election. My God, the idea of electing Supreme Court justices, but there was a state Supreme Court election not that long ago in which Elon Musk dumped millions of dollars
in Wisconsin.
In Wisconsin, it dumped millions of dollars. He did not get his preferred candidate on that state Supreme Court, but what we want in a court system is a measure of judicial independence. In Canada, the way we have gotten that judicial independence is through appointments, yes, by political people, right? The Prime Minister names all of the most important judges in the country, the Supreme Courts, the Federal Court, and the
Court of Appeal for Ontario.
Exactly, right. But, nobody's pretending that the process can be entirely walled off from politics, but the process and the way we talk about the judicial system in this country has never been as thoroughly politicized as it is in the U.S. The argument for elections is that you are making the process independent of those elected representatives, that you're functionally putting the decision in the hands of the people themselves. Again, like a nice thought in principle. In practice, I don't think we love the way it actually works in the U.S.
The Premier had a funny line where he said, you know what, the next election, I want to see the Progressive Conservatives run candidates, the Liberals run candidates, New Democrats run candidates, Greens run candidates, and the judges run candidates, and let's all run against each other. I don't know. Can we go on the record here as saying that's kind of not the way we do things in Canada? And I don't know, has it served us pretty well to do it our way as opposed to the American way for 100 and almost 67 years or whatever it is?
Yeah. I would love for everybody to sort of take a breath, and it's not the judges are beyond criticism by any stretch. We should debate important judicial decisions. Clearly, the Premier has his arguments about recent judicial decisions, but the idea of making this another partisan battleground just fills me with dread.
Well, this was a really quite significant news conference this past week on Wednesday because the Premier was asked a bunch of other things, and we'll go into some detail about those right now as well. He was asked why he didn't come out and campaign in the federal election with his Conservative cousin, Pierre Poilievre, to make a tough-on-crime joint statement together. And here's what he had to say about that. Doug Ford.
Last time I checked, Pierre Poilievre never came out in our election. Matter of fact, him or one of his lieutenants told every one of his members, don't you dare go out and help the PCs. Isn't that ironic?
Yeah, not a lot of love there between the two. We talked last week about that election night screed by the MP from Durham, Jamil.
I regret to inform you that was still this week.
Oh, gosh, that's right. That was still this week, wasn't it?
What does time mean anymore?
That's right. That was, when did we do that? That was Tuesday. Yeah,
yes.
That was Tuesday night. That's right. And it actually was Wednesday morning, I think. It was after midnight when Jamil Giovanni went on that screed. Is that right?
No, the election was Monday. You and I discussed it on Tuesday. It was either very late Monday or early Tuesday morning.
Why don't I just quit while I'm behind? No, anyway, there is actually a point I'm trying to make here somewhere if I can get my timing right. Jamil Giovanni, elected in Durham region, used to work for Doug Ford.
Yes.
Had a very significant break with Doug Ford, gave an interview to David Common on CBC television, whenever it was, Monday night, Tuesday morning, calling Doug Ford's campaign team a bunch of goons. He chided the Premier for making what he thought were unhelpful comments about the federal Conservative campaign team during the writ period. And just in case you thought that everybody had got their lines out and now was a time to tone things down and get the federal and provincial parties sort of singing from the same hymn book, no, that did not happen. Check out what Jamil Giovanni tweeted on Wednesday. And if you're listening to this as opposed to watching us, I'm going to describe this. This is a shot of Doug Ford, almost like he's in WWE, ripping off a T-shirt that says Ontario PC on the front, only to reveal underneath a shirt that says Liberal on the front, as if to say the Premier is really a closet Liberal. And this is, of course, like a meme of Hulk Hogan from wrestling. So we know that there is...
So proud of you that you got that reference.
How about that? Yeah. We know there's a huge feud between the Ford people and the Poilievre people. I am guessing this is not going to lower the temperature in that feud.
No, I suspect not. Ford was also asked what it would take to build bridges between the parties. And it's worth saying that, of course, Premier Ford is not the only one having difficulties with the federal Conservative Party. Nova Scotia Premier Tim Houston is also on the outs, I guess. Ford has said that, they can pick up the phone anytime and give him a call. Perhaps he was reminding people that Poilievre did not phone Ford to congratulate him on his election victory not that long ago.
I think he waited 3 weeks before making that call. Yeah. Anyway, we got something on that?
I believe we've got a clip on that as well.
Fire away.
Well, all they have to do is make a phone call. I like a lot of the MPs, but the people spoke, and they spoke loud and clear. They spoke loud and clear in our election, and they spoke loud and clear on the federal election. And so that's democracy. They elect who they want.
I can tell you the Premier usually has one or two news conferences every week to announce something of some significance in provincial policy.
And we don't grab a clip from everyone. But
we sure don't, because I can tell you, they're not all as interesting or entertaining as that one was from earlier this week. That was something.
Sometimes it's a feast.
Yeah, indeed it was. All right, let's get on to issue 2. The Financial Accountability Office of Ontario has released a new report on the potential impact of Donald Trump's tariffs on Ontario's economy, and it is not a pretty picture. JMM, let's go through the deets on that.
Right. Just to remind our audience, as always, the FAO is an independent government officer, legislative officer. They do not answer to the government directly. They are named by the legislature acting collectively. And so they have provided two scenarios in their most recent report that was issued on Wednesday, one that is a low tariff impact scenario and one that is a high impact scenario. So some of the highlights from their low impact model. Based on the tariffs as they stand now, Ontario's real GDP will slow to 0.6% growth, which is less than half of the 1.7% growth that would have happened in the no tariff scenario, which means that there could be a modest recession this year. The FAO estimates that there will be 68,100 fewer jobs in 2025 and 119,200 fewer jobs in 2026 compared to the no tariff scenario. We've talked a lot about inflation the last few years. The Ontario Consumer Price Index, which is a measure of inflation, would rise a little bit, but might be offset by weaker economic activity and lower fuel prices.
Needless to say, none of that is good news. And as you might have imagined, the Premier had something to say about that at this week's very prominent news conference as well. Doug Ford.
I'm going to disagree with that. Let's see what happens. We have a newly elected government federally. I'm sure the Prime Minister will be going down there to talk to President Trump. The only thing that we will accept is zero tariffs. It's simple as that. I always look at the glass as half full, and no one can predict the future, but I'm predicting that we're going to do better than other jurisdictions around the world and around North America.
Now, I don't have to tell anybody watching or listening to this that Donald Trump has not exactly been a portrait of consistency during the time that he's been announcing these tariffs. You know, they're on, they're off, they're on, they're off, they're 10%, they're 25%, they're 200%. So how does the FAO, the Financial Accountability Office, deal with all of that uncertainty?
Right. So we've talked about the low impact scenario. That assumes that tariffs will decline from 25% to 10%. But the high impact scenario assumes that the U.S. will introduce further tariffs on lumber, steel, aluminum, and cars, and that Canada will retaliate in kind. In that scenario, job losses would be greater and the recession would be deeper. The report also looks into the near future. If the tariffs continue by 2029, Ontario's exports of steel and aluminum would be 50% lower, auto exports 20% lower, and auto parts 30% lower. Obviously, maybe it's not obvious, but some of the worst impacts really would be concentrated in Ontario's manufacturing sector. So you're talking about job losses potentially all throughout Southern Ontario and particularly the Southwest. What the report doesn't cover is what impact potential fiscal supports from both the federal government and the provinces might be able to do to offset some of these harms. Those efforts obviously could soften the blow somewhat, but the problem with manufacturing is that so many of the things we make are parts that go into American finished products, like cars most obviously, and if they stop buying parts from us for their products, or they just stop being able to buy them because of the tariffs, it's a real open question about how much money or how much good federal or provincial money can do if this drags on for years and years and years. So lots and lots of big questions. I do also want to say one other thing that I don't think this report really is capable of asking is, even if Trump were to drop all tariffs on Canada tomorrow, but he maintains the tariffs on China, we're looking at some really nasty economic times in the U.S. just because of that. And if America goes into a recession because of the stuff that's going on between Trump and China, that is also likely to drag Canadian economic growth down as well, even if the tariffs themselves go away, as the Premier and the Prime Minister would both clearly want. So lots of things that are, frankly, unknown unknowns, to use the Donald Rumsfeld's line.
Mm-hmm. A very unhappy scenario, regardless of which scenario we're talking about. And with that, we're off to issue 3. There are more than 1,000 cases of measles in the province of Ontario. 1,000. Now, for some context here, between 2013 and 2023, there were only 100 cases. So we have 10 times as many cases in 1 year as we did during an entire decade. Many people are left wondering, where is Ontario's Chief Medical Officer of Health, Dr. Kieran Moore? JMM, do we have an answer to that?
We do. Can I stop for 1 second and say, it's 5 years since COVID, and I thought I had processed a lot of my feelings about the pandemic, and then I went to Public Health Ontario's website and I looked up their reports on measles, and they are laid out in the same template as all of the old COVID reports were.
Oh boy.
And I had a real flashback moment yesterday at my desk, looking through all of the data broken out by public health units, and it's fine. I'm fine, but it was just a reminder of what it was like several years ago. About the Chief Medical Officer of Health. Moore put out a statement back in March and has spoken with journalists saying that the outbreak has stabilized, but we are looking at hundreds of cases per week, sometimes 100 cases this week, which is a lot considering measles is incredibly infectious. I mean, back when we were talking about COVID, one of the things I heard from doctors and other medical practitioners was thank God COVID isn't as infectious as measles, right? That was the standard that they were using to set it against. It really would have been a nightmare. Measles is, I think we associate it with as kind of like a childhood disease, but it is not just a rash. It is not just a cough or a runny nose. In some cases, it can lead to pneumonia, brain swelling, and tragically, in some cases, death. Many children are too young to be vaccinated. This, again, something we remember from COVID, but in general, we do not vaccinate children against measles under a year old. So they are at risk, and many older adults may have only received one shot. They may have received a shot many, many years ago and might have some natural immunity, but their vaccinations might be out of date. So this is all to say that there is potential for this to get bad in ways that we do not want it to get bad. The MPP for Don Valley East and himself a doctor, Adil Shamji, was left wondering where Kieran Moore is in all of this. We do have a clip. Let us take a look at what he said.
I shouldn't be the one standing at the podium here. Members of the government and Ministry of Health should be. The public deserves regular updates. But the last official update that anyone received was a press release from the Chief Medical Officer of Health in mid-March. And what parent reads press releases?
This is an interesting question. Dr. Kieran Moore was in front of the cameras a lot during COVID,
Yep.
and then he wasn't. And the assumption was that he was kind of told by the government to take a lower profile, and now we haven't seen him in front of the cameras during this measles outbreak.
Yes.
What's going on?
Well, Dr. Moore has said that the province is addressing the issue at a more local, granular level, if you want to put it that way. They have been dealing with some of the Mennonite communities in the southwest of the province where the outbreak has really been most prominent. They are translating information into Low German, which was not something that had occurred to me, but public health has to be creative and flexible, right? They are putting these Low German messaging out on radio and print advertisements. He says they are taking a more targeted approach. And I think it is worth acknowledging that there's at least an argument that raising the salience, raising all the prominence of vaccine messaging might not be helpful in terms of convincing people to go and get their shots. Certainly we saw by the end of COVID, certainly things had become so politically polarized that people were getting very resistant to vaccination. Vaccine skeptics exist in many communities. There are also, of course, matters of religious conviction. Some people just avoid because of that. And nevertheless, I think it is uncontroversial at this point to say that the best way, and in fact the government's position when they are asked, they say the right thing, which is that the best way to control the spread of measles is to get vaccinated, particularly for children to be protected.
Well, I think you and I both have a lot of admiration and respect for a guy named Andre Picard, who's probably the leading health columnist in the country, writes for the Globe and Mail. He too has been wondering where Dr. Moore has been, why he isn't showing more public-facing leadership on this issue. He said that Dr. Moore should stop defending the Ontario law that allows parents to opt their children out of vaccination on religious or philosophical grounds. What do you think about that?
I mean, this is an issue that, again, it came up during COVID when I and others were asking the government whether they would list COVID-19 as one of the diseases that you could potentially suspend children from school for if they weren't immunized. This is a long-standing policy because diseases spread among children in schools, and certain diseases can be very dangerous, like measles. Measles is on the list of diseases that children are nominally supposed to be vaccinated for, and they can, again, nominally be suspended if they do not get vaccinated. But Ontario's law is kind of full of holes. School boards and public health units can suspend students who are missing those vaccinations, but there are exemptions they can get. Moore has been quoted as saying that the outbreak will likely continue into the summer. Obviously, if students aren't in schools during the summer, then they lose that little bit of leverage of potentially suspending kids from school. That said, some public health units have started using this power. The Toronto Public Health, for example, suspended 173 students earlier this month for lack of vaccination documents. All that said, I think we can just take a moment and say, we can be honest about what's going on here, right? The government does not want to talk about vaccinations very loudly because a big chunk of the population is still very angry about vaccinations during COVID-19. The Ford government is not out here going full RFK Jr. on us, but clearly, a lot of their critics, a lot of Moore's critics say that they could be doing a lot more than they are.
RFK Jr. is a new verb, is it? Going
Yes.
RFK Jr.?
Yeah, whatever else one can say about the state of public health in Ontario and in Canada, at least we don't have somebody at the highest reaches of government saying really obviously false things. So
thank goodness for that. Give the email address and let's get out of here.
Right. If you would like to ask about any content on the show, please email us at onpolitics@tvo.org.
And that is the On Poly podcast for this Friday, May the 2nd, 2025.
You can follow our show on Apple Podcasts so that you get notified each time a new episode is available. And you can see the video version of the podcast on the TVO Today YouTube channel.
And until next Friday, everybody, bye-bye.
Bye.
30 years ago, we did a program on TVO called Studio 2, and one of its regular features was a debate between two people who seemed to disagree on, well, pretty much everything. Their segment was called Friendly Fire, and it featured Irshad Manji, LGBTQ Muslim refusenik, and Michael Corrin, staunch Catholic conservative. And we thought it might be fun to get the band back together, so here they are again 3 decades later, Irshad and Michael. Welcome back. It's kind of trippy
30
seeing
years.
Yeah,
Happy
30
to
years.
be alive.
Yeah, kind of trippy seeing you two together again, you know?
We got together about 4 years ago. You had a book out and I introduced you.
When you interviewed me, we had a
interviewed
lovely
you.
conversation.
But long before that, even before I'd had a sort of change in life, I was driving along and you were walking along and I stopped the car and you said something to me that I thought was wonderful. You said, I think we've both done a lot of growing up.
Oh.
And it was lovely. And that was even before I'd become this terrible lefty that I am now. But yeah, it was. I'm so glad because look, we didn't get along back then.
No, we didn't. We didn't trust each other.
No. And now we're very much in love.
I think so. as platonic as it is. Yes, exactly.
Do you know how you two got paired up in the first place? Remember how that happened?
It was Vodik, wasn't it?
Yeah, so Vodik Schemberg was an ace producer with Studio 2. I honestly can't remember how he tracked me down, but I do remember thinking when, he paired us up, I remember thinking that this will be the death of me. Because at the time, being very left-wing, and myself, and really feeling the peer pressure to, slam dunk those conservatives. I honestly, Steve, I will tell you with no word of exaggeration, I would feel nauseous the night before every taping.
Because?
Because I felt like, and my peers made me feel this way, the weight of the left in Canada was on my shoulders. And one wrong word, one wrong move, and, I gave in to that Boston.
Yeah.
Did you know each other before meeting up in the studio?
No, Vodek, who's a mutual friend of all of us, he said he'd this wonderful young woman, and I said, yeah, sure, whatever. And then we met, and it wasn't I remember we had a lunch or something. It wasn't that comfortable, but I agreed, and it was. Looking back, I can't speak for you, but I'm such a different person. But even putting politics aside, I think there was an anger in me and a need to try to win, which I rather despise now. But then I can't expunge that. That was part of me back then.
And not only that, Michael, but we were going head to head.
Yeah,
this was a debate format. So, of course, it was framed as win-lose. And that is what made me want to vomit every night.
Yeah.
We had you situated in the studio with a rather small desk in front of each other. You were standing and facing each other. And it got intense from time to time.
It sure did. I remember one, I think one of our shows before Christmas, telling you to, have a silent night. So, yeah.
There is an outtake. You're not going to show the outtake.
We're not going to show the outtake, but I think I know the one you mean.
Where I tell her to go forth and multiply. And, yeah.
Or was it go procreate copiously? Something like that.
Well, you could...
it was something like that. Yeah.
You'll be happy to know I did not take your advice.
Did you actively dislike each other as you were doing this segment?
We didn't know each other socially, really.
Right.
But for me, yes, I would say that I probably disliked you at the time we were together. But outside of that, you did a profile of me for a magazine, I think, years ago, and spoke to my wife and family. And you were very nice about my wife and family. You were horrible about me. But that's okay.
Well, they didn't sign up to, debate with me, right?
Probably justified.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think we probably did, didn't we?
Yeah, we hated each other. And
Really?
I think no, really. I think that would be fair to say. And for starters, we did not trust one another to play gotcha. That's what we expected one another to do. And might I just add that the way the show was produced deepened that distrust. Because Vodek, God bless him, he was a fabulous producer and one of certainly my intellectual mentors. That said, he would not let us speak to one another at any point before we came up on set. So, the fact of the matter is we didn't know one another as human beings and as individuals.
That's right.
We only knew of one another and as avatars, as caricatures.
That's very well put. At no point, if I would have said, or you would have said, that's an interesting point, let me think about that
right.
one. They probably would have said, cut.
Yeah.
That wasn't, I'm not blaming anybody, but that wasn't what they wanted.
But they wanted the food fight?
Conflict. Yeah.
They wanted the food fight.
Absolutely.
I think so, yeah.
See, I never, okay, I have to tell you, I never inferred that. I inferred that we wanted good, energetic, definitely head-to-head discussion on big issues of the day.
Yeah, that's because you're a nice Canadian. And Michael and I are, feisty immigrants.
Yeah, we're terrible foreigners.
Yeah.
Yeah, look, there could have been, and I'm not criticizing those intentions, if they were. I certainly got that impression, though. And our characters, and, I always admired your intelligence. I never thought, I'm going to debate with someone today who's going to be a walkover. You're sharp as anything. And there was something about you I certainly respected. But yeah, the like wasn't there. And I don't really know how that changed, almost in an organic way.
Yes,
but it really, really did. And
while you were doing the segment?
No, afterwards.
And many years afterwards,
many years.
I think.
And it wasn't about political change. That came later.
Yeah.
It was just, I think, about characters changing and life experience, something like that.
And life giving each of us several kicks in the butt so that, we were humbled just by more lived experience. Certainly I can say that for myself. Yeah. And you're absolutely right, Michael, that, it would have been wonderful if every once in a while one of us had said, that's a great point. I've got to think about that. But since I'm not prepared to debate that one, let me get back to my scripted message, right? And that's, of course, what Us Versus Them does. It puts people in boxes. Your various nuances are papered over, and then you become cartoon characters of yourself. And that's when it's easy to actively dislike the other.
Did it ever get to the point where either one of you marched off the set and said, I can't work with this person anymore?
I think it did, didn't it?
Yeah,
I can't remember the specifics. I got a feeling it did.
Yeah. Was it you who marched
No, I think it
off?
might have been you.
No, I think it might have been you. No, I wasn't like that.
Maybe it was me. But you know what is interesting? Because the world has become more like we were. The polarization, the absurd caricature of you're right, you're left. You have to be right, you have to be wrong. I'm not saying that we're an example in any way, but my golly, if we could be a bit more like that and just see the humanity and the nuance in what people are saying and thinking.
Yeah. And ask why. Ask more questions, sincerely. Not ask accusations, but ask actual questions. What might I be missing about where you're coming from? Yeah. Help me understand that, right? It's all of that just coming from a place of curiosity rather than judgment.
Yeah.
Changes everything.
Well, would you like to see a bit of you two coming from a place of judgment and not curiosity?
That's not a sincere question.
That is not a sincere question because you don't have a choice here.
Exactly.
Michael said, are you going to show some video of us that's going to embarrass me? And I said, I certainly hope so. But anyway, Sheldon, if you would, friendly fire from 30 years ago. Roll it, please.
Well, it should be changed by education, by the evolution of a society that accepts minorities.
You want to tell people like me to be patient?
Yes,
we have been patient enough.
Yes,
it is
I
about
do.
time
Every
that something
single
was
survey.
Done.
Every survey has shown, I say it again, that minorities are increasing their position in the workplace, their positions of authority in the workplace. Every time this sort of equity legislation has been brought in, it has failed appallingly. Let me ask you another question. What will happen saying, you see, the phrase used here is it has to reflect the community. I can understand
That's the phrase
a workplace
they use.
has to reflect the community. What about in rural Ontario, where there aren't any minorities? Will they not be allowed to employ black people there?
Actually, I'm glad you brought that up because what you're assuming, and clearly you haven't read the law in this case, you have not.
Just for this show, in fact. I wouldn't read it otherwise.
Exactly, and why would you bother to, right?
Yes.
Exactly, because it doesn't affect you, does it? Oh, no, because employment doesn't affect you. But let me deal with the issue. Let me deal with the issue of rural Ontario or rural anything. This law does not force anybody to hire anybody.
Wow.
I've got a bloody bow tie on. I'm about 20 pounds heavier. And why was I drying my hair? That was a ridiculous thing to do.
Oh, the finger wagging. The
finger
wagging.
We were both doing the finger wagging. It was, I'm not, isn't it interesting? I'm not proud of that in any way. No. And I cringe at it. And I
got to tell you, it was good TV, guys.
Yeah, well, that's the thing. Yeah. They ended it after 2 years. After 2 years,
it was after 3.
I thought it was 2. Maybe it was just you after that. I don't know.
I was so confused by Michael. I took his arguments to heart, and then I began debating with myself. Yeah. But I think whenever it ended, it largely ended, Michael, and let's be real about this, because we couldn't stand each other.
Yeah, I think that's probably true.
Yeah.
I mean, was it good TV? Maybe it was. I mean, I know people watched it. I didn't come away feeling happy about life or about what I'd said and what I'd done. Yeah. Look, I'm not going to be falsely modest. We're both intelligent people. We have a lot to say about a lot of things. We couldn't really say them there. We shouted a lot of slogans and we tried to get little bits of information in, but we're being very hard on the people who put this together because we weren't, it wasn't bayonets at us. We did it voluntarily. We were paid to do it.
Absolutely.
And I mean, I've thought about this a lot at various parts of my life. Do I regret? There's no point in regretting. I did what I did, and you move on and you learn.
And what a journey. Really, what a journey from a place of, doubling down because of our dislike for one another. Not because the arguments were great, but because one of us needed to win, and more importantly, the other needed to lose, right? What a journey from that state to a state in which, you and I can have the kinds of conversations that really allow us to be fully human. And because ultimately that is what we are. Everybody, I've learned the hard way, Steve, everybody is what I would call a plural. So much more than meets the eye. And you can't know that if we're just sticking labels on one another. And of course, labels come with baggage. So conservative, progressive, queer, straight, woman, man, etc. Black, white, or brown, white.
Muslim, half Jewish.
Yes, exactly. They come with baggage, which manipulates us into believing, based on that label, I already know everything I know about.
And it
I
leaves
need
no
to know
room
about
for
you.
humanity.
No, and leaves no room for complexity and for surprise.
And what defines us, and more and more I try to emphasize this to people, if I speak, if I write, if I preach, humanity is the great defining aspect of all of us. And the politics are relatively trivial. And we have to cling on to that at this time, probably more than any other in the past 40 or 50 years.
You know, Michael, I have to disagree.
Okay.
I really do. Humanity may be the defining commonality of us around this table, but that leaves out so many other living beings. And I know that sound. I get that snicker.
Where's it going?
That snicker.
I love my dog.
Very good. Very good. I would say that the fact that all living beings are sentient, they can feel, they can suffer, they can love, is really what ought to be the defining feature of any, organism on this planet.
So you're just trying to say beyond humanity?
Beyond humanity.
I don't have
absolutely.
Arguments, though, with earthworms or with rabbits. Generally, I don't, anyway.
But they may have arguments with you.
They may.
And you say, I
am a vegetarian.
You're one better than me. Damn!
But in terms of political disagreements, that's what political, social, economic, religious disagreements. I mean, religion is the area I work in now. When we emphasize the humanity, when I sit down with someone who's Jewish, Muslim, Hindu, atheist, I'm not going to pretend we don't have differences of opinion.
Right.
So fundamental, profound. But the humanity of all of us sitting there, if we emphasize that, can we actually end that meeting in something approaching love and understanding? And it is so very important. And particularly, and I don't want to bash on Trump, everyone's doing that, deservedly, but a man who is so removing the humanity of the of political discourse and debasing all that we thought. We thought there was a time when Democrat, Republican, Conservative, Liberal could actually shake hands and say, I respect you. And there was a time like that. In the United States, I don't think there is anymore. And I do fear we might move slightly towards that in this country too.
Irshad, as Michael has made his epiphany over the years from staunch social conservative to, I don't know, what do you want to call yourself now? I mean, you're kind of liberation theology.
No, I'm not.
No,
because that's very specific. You know what I think? An anachronism. I'm a sort of 1950s British Labour Party type. I mean, I don't identify with the left as such. Sometimes it appalls me. I'm progressive. I'm a Christian. And I think being an authentic Christian demands that you are progressive and you see humanity in everyone and you embrace the godly idea of equality.
Okay.
Which is why, by the way, he gets so much hate from both atheists and fellow Christians.
No,
I mean, I've seen it. And I really appreciate your moral courage in standing up for, what you believe in a way that is nonviolent. God bless.
But given the guy who came out and argued with you in that bow tie,
yes,
could you kind of believe this transformation that has happened to him?
I absolutely can.
You could.
Because I feel it in my own self. I no longer identify as any one ideological or political label. They all, sort of reduce us to something less than we actually are. And ultimately, I'm so much more interested in conversation than confrontation for one reason alone, because I learn so much. And learning is a joy. Is that okay to say on the education channel called TVO?
I'm pretty sure it is.
Okay.
Yeah. Sure
Learning is a joy. And unfortunately, debate, especially the kinds of showdowns that we would have, which make for great TV, not about learning at all. It's all about winning.
As you have watched her transform over the years from the person you used to wag your finger at 30 years ago to kind of a superstar in the, New York University and all of the things she's involved in. What have you thought?
Many years ago at high school, we had a chaplain, and because he was so kind and nice, we mocked him and made his life absolute hell. We saw weakness. When it wasn't weakness, it was decency. But I in particular, I wasn't nice to him. And I was at a funeral for an old school friend a couple of years ago in my collar. And he was there, a much older man at this point. And he came up to me and I thought, oh no. And I said, you're probably a bit surprised to see me wearing this. And he said, no, not at all. I always thought you would.
Wow.
People change. Never be surprised. Never, ever be upset or shocked, because change is so vital. We're all in a constant state of revolution, if you like. We're becoming something better and greater, I hope. And there was always that great intelligence and humanity in you. And I wonder if we'd been friends at the time, would we both have changed each other more effectively, more quickly? I don't think it matters.
I don't think it does matter. No. And in any event, you know, it's kind of like pushing people into changing means that that change is tentative and insincere. But when you change yourself, it's because you really mean it. And I think that's what I see in both of us.
So what it means is if we did friendly fire again, it would be really tedious, wouldn't it?
Exactly.
Well, in fact,
terrible TV, terrible.
You know, you kind of took the words right out of my mouth. I was kind of going to put you two to work right now and just sort of apropos of nothing say, what do you think the biggest problem in the world is today? And then get you two to maybe discuss it a little bit right here. Irshad, what's the biggest problem the world faces today?
It's the most frightening four-letter F word in the English language, and that's fear. We are consumed with anxiety, and not necessarily about particular issues, but about each other. There is a profound lack of social trust, and without trust, there can be no progress. There can only be payback. That's my worry about today.
Fear. Okay. Michael, how about you?
I'd like to be really clever and give another word, but I think that's absolutely brilliant. Because I think if you look at where things are particularly problematic, look at the Middle East, for example. The fear, the understandable fear that Israelis have of Palestinians and the understandable fear that Palestinians have of Israelis. Look at Russia. A beautiful, wonderful country where people have been fed the idea of fear, that Ukraine is a threat to you, that the Western world is a threat to you. Donald Trump was elected on fear. And I'm not forgiving the Democrats on this, because they played into it in a way. They didn't provide an alternative. But telling people, be frightened of the foreigner. Be frightened of the person who lives beyond your border. Be frightened of all sorts of things within your own country. Change, difference, other people are a threat. When they're not. And there are valid threats in the world. Of course there are. I'm not being Pollyanna about this. But if we could understand, empathize. I mean, that word has been very criticized lately. Oh, empathy, that's just being woke. No, it's not. Empathy is feeling what other people feel, understanding what they feel. What are their aspirations? What are their fears?
And you see, that takes conversation,
enormous.
Not confrontation.
We can't do that today, though. We can't have conversations because everybody is in one silo watching Fox TV, and then everybody else is in another silo watching MSNBC and CNN, and they don't talk to each other. They just live in their echo chambers. So how do we converse?
I will say, Steve, that young people, and I work with a lot of them as students, they're dying for this kind of interaction. They are hungry for it.
Civil interaction.
Civil interaction, empathetic interaction, compassionate conversation. The problem is not this generation, it's us.
Well, I don't know about that.
We're not role modeling it, Steve.
Ben Shapiro's role modeling it pretty well.
You're being sarcastic.
I am indeed.
Yes.
You know, Ben
right.
Those kinds of talking heads.
But those talking heads don't have relationships of the kind that people like us and many watching tonight do have with young people. And if we would be intentional about role modeling decency and curiosity and humility, it would rub off and give some hope to a new generation.
We have 4 children, and when I look at them, I mean, I'm very proud of them in all sorts of ways. But they are typical of their peers and their friends, and you do think it's all going to be okay. Having watched them go through, I mean, the kids today, they're incredibly hardworking. They're very respectful. They do understand social issues. You mentioned Ben Shapiro. He's not alone. Young people, was it Andrew Tate and those who follow him, young men, out of fear, thinking there's something that they're not. There was a wonderful show on British TV, Adolescence, I'm sure it'll come over here as well, about young boys and girls and their attitudes towards each other. But it is male fear. Guys who go to the gym every day and say they're tough and they're rough and women should be treated just as objects. You really think that's coming out of confidence? Of course it's not. The very opposite. Right. They are frightened.
Right.
I don't know if... there are too many examples in history where we've looked at young people and been optimistic to be then terribly disappointed.
Right.
But I'm too old, I think, to worry about being wrong. I just have to show optimism, and I do think there are enough young people. Even interviews in Russia with Russian young people. I saw an extended interview that they asked them about homosexuality because Russia is so homophobic. These young people, they weren't incredibly progressive, but they were saying, I don't care. I mean, I don't want anything to do with it, but I don't care. Very different from their parents. Africa, because part of the issues, things I've dealt with is homophobia in the church. In Africa, Uganda, so ground zero for homophobia in Africa. Young people in Uganda, very different views about this, very different, because they're watching television from America. They're meeting all sorts of people. And, I mean, when I went to school many, many years ago...
There was school back then?
There was school back then. there was not one gay kid in the class. No, of course.
That you knew of.
Exactly, that's the point.
Right.
There have been loads of gay kids, but no one came out. Today, young people, they out gay kids. They live with, they mix with, they know, they love. In all sorts of areas. When you spend time with people who are different, you understand that difference. It's nothing to be afraid of. It's actually something to be embraced.
At the same time, young progressive kids also have to realize that when they're asked questions, it is not necessarily out of fear of them. So, for example, I have a 16-year-old niece, now 18 years old actually, but back when this conversation I had with her, she's cisgender. She is female. She was born female. She isn't planning to transition, but out of solidarity with many of her friends, she's non-binary. And when I asked her a couple questions about that, she instantly accused me of being transphobic. And that is the kind of fear that shuts down understanding.
Is that a criticism of your niece, as in she's got to get over that?
She did get over that.
She did?
Yes, and I'm happy to say it took her far less time than it took me to get over, referring
16
to
to
people
18,
as folks.
a lot of things happen in those 2 years.
Exactly.
You are quite right, though. I mean, the left, I thought 10, 11 years ago, 12 years ago, I thought I'd be a natural part of the left. In some ways I am, but some of the attitudes of the hard left in particular are appalling. Are appallingly intolerant. Yeah. Anyone who is not like us is wrong. I mean, the conservatives are all bad. Israel-Palestine, absolute lack of understanding of the history of the region and why things are the way they are.
And it's part of the reason we have Trump today.
Yes, it is.
It helped till the soil for a demagogue.
Yeah.
Folks, this was a joy. I'm so glad we got you two back together again.
Yeah.
And look at that.
Thank you.
Irshad Manji, Michael Corrin, friendly fire. From enemies, I won't even say frenemies.
No, don't
You guys
say
are
that.
friends.
No,
You guys
we
are
are.
friends.
We
Well
are.
done.
Yeah.
Thank you both.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Real pleasure.
And that is the agenda for Friday, May the 2nd, 2025. Monday on the program, have sporting events become too much of a spectacle at the expense of sports? We'll explore that. I'm Steve Paikin. Thanks for watching TVO, for joining us online at tvo.org, and we'll see you back here again on Monday.